And welcome to the Football for Kids podcast with me, Darren Rees. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a very special derby. It's Reds versus Blues. Manchester versus Manchester. We're going to be talking about the famous Manchester derby. Before we get going with everything to do with Manchester City versus Manchester United, we need to do some shout-outs, messages, and read a couple of your Apple Podcast reviews. So, let's start with the Apple Podcast reviews. The first one is from Pizza Blob. Now that is a name, which says, this pod is love heart emoji, love heart eyes emoji, smiley emoji, don't even know what that emoji is, wink emoji, thumb emoji, and lots of other emojis. And then finishes with Zoo and Haaland rules. So thank you very much to you, Pizza Blob, whoever you may be. And thank you for your 5 stars. And the next one, who is from Arta12 on Apple Podcasts, gives the podcast 5 stars and an amazing rating and says, I love this podcast. Not only does it have facts that you might not know, it teaches you the true meaning of football. Please can you do an episode about David De Gea, as my brother and I love him, and Manchester United. Unbelievably awesome. And if you listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, please do make sure that you're doing 2 things. Number 1, hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. And number 2, give the podcast a 5-star rating and leave a review. And I might read your review out on one of the next episodes. Your messages have been coming in thick and fast to footballforkidspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much to everybody who has sent a message this week. If you've sent a message, I will get round to it. It just takes a few weeks to get to them because there are so many coming in. Please do keep them coming. The first one I'm going to read out on this episode says, Hi Darren, can you do an episode on Mo Salah? I am 5 years old and my name is Axel. I love your podcast. Oh my God, I don't want to listen to any other podcast except for yours. Thank you for doing the pod. Please shout out to my grandparents, Jerry and Mary Louise. They live in Sweden. Well, thank you very much, Axel. I really appreciate your message, and hopefully you've recently had the chance to listen to the episode on Mo Salah. And another one on this episode says, Hi Darren, my name is Freddie and I play for Broadstone Tigers under 7s. Thank you so much for the great podcast. I listen to them whenever I'm in the car with my dad. I support Cardiff City and Spurs. My favourite episodes were Gareth Bale, Harry Kane and the Football Songs episode. Please can you do a shout out to all my teammates and wish us luck for next weekend. Please can you also do an episode on the Championship. I love to go and watch Cardiff City play with my dad and it would be great to learn more about the league. Thanks so much, from Freddie Richards. Well, a massive shout out to you, Freddie, and everybody in your football team. I imagine your football season has ended now or is due to end soon, so I hope you've all done really well and I hope that you've all enjoyed your football. A big shout out to all your teammates and of course to your football coaches as well. Thank you so much for being a listener and thank you for your message. Right then, we better get on with this episode about the brilliant, the fantastic, the mouth-watering Manchester Derby. The Manchester Derby is one of the most exciting and intriguing football matches in the world of football. 2 teams from a football-mad city who are super passionate about their clubs. Did you know that the first ever Manchester Derby was over 142 years ago, when Manchester City were called West Gorton and Manchester United were called Newton Heath? Manchester United, or Newton Heath, won the first of the recorded games 3-0, and the match was reported as a very pleasant game of football indeed. I imagine that's how the reporter spoke. All the way back in the late 1800s, the 2 sides were just 2 ordinary sides from Manchester, a place where a lot of local football teams existed. But over the years, the teams gradually grew into bigger and better football clubs. When there were some proper leagues formed and the 2 sides met for the first time in a proper league match, all the way back in 1884, Manchester United beat Manchester City 5-2. And just for the record, that was 139 seasons ago. The Manchester Derby is a derby which is rich in history. Over the years, the crowds for the Manchester Derby grew and grew, and by the early 1900s, which was still over 120 years ago, the game started to attract over 10,000 spectators to watch the two sides battle it out. Fast forward many years and decades, it was in the 1970s when some of the big characters of the game started to make the Manchester Derby a game that football fans just couldn't miss. There was a player called George Best, or Georgie Best as he was known to some. He was one of the best players of his generation and one of the greatest players to ever play for Manchester United. Georgie Best, in a Manchester derby, caused huge arguments and tension when he made a really terrible, harsh tackle on a Manchester City player. The tackle was so devastating that he broke the Manchester City's player's leg. And the most incredible thing about it is that George Best only got a yellow card. The City fans were absolutely furious, and the game has been one which has been referred back to for over 50 years. That game ended 4-1 to Manchester City. Over the next few seasons, the two sides would meet on many occasions in the league and in tournaments. City won some games, United won some, and there was many draws too. In the final season of the 1980s, Manchester City thrashed Manchester United 5-1. They needed to make the buzz of that win last though, as after this thrashing, Manchester City didn't beat United for 13 years. Between 1989 and 2002, Manchester City just couldn't get the win. They drew on numerous occasions, they were beaten by a goal and hammered 5-0 at one point. But after 13 years of miserable results, Manchester City won a Manchester derby on the 9th of November, winning 3-1. Although Manchester City took 13 years to get a win over United, there was an even bigger gap, which was Manchester City beating United at Old Trafford. In fact, it took 34 years at one point for Man City to win away in a Manchester derby. Big characters have always been a big part of the Manchester derby and making it so exciting. Back in the early 2000s, Erling Haaland's dad, Alfie Haaland, was playing for Manchester City, and he was tackled by a hard and ruthless Manchester United defender called Roy Keane. Haaland was badly injured by the tackle, and Roy Keane was rightly sent off. The feud between these two players and the other players on the pitch made the fans want to win these games more than anything. The passion oozed out of the spectators, and they wanted nothing but to beat their rivals. The distance from the Etihad, Manchester City Stadium, to Old Trafford, Manchester United Stadium, is just over 4 miles away. If you were in a helicopter, you could see the two stadiums on a clear day. Some players have played for both Manchester United and Manchester City. A brave move by any player, I'd say. Some of the most famous ones to do this though was Manchester United's greatest goalkeeper, Peter Schmeichel. Schmeichel played nearly 300 games for United and was a Man United legend. He ended his professional goalkeeping career with Manchester City and made 29 appearances for them. Andy Cole, who was a legendary striker for Manchester United and played nearly 200 games for them, also had a short spell at Manchester City. And a player called Dennis Law, a legend of the game, who was first at Manchester City, then went to Manchester United for over 300 games and then went back to Manchester City. That is one brave man. Over the years, the two have met 189 times. Manchester City have won 58 of those games. Manchester United have won 78 of those games. And there's been 53 draws. The largest victory in history was a 6-1 win to City, which happened twice actually. Once all the way back in 1926 and then again in 2011. The most amount of goals in a Manchester derby was 9 when City beat United 6-3 in 2022. The top goalscorer of all time in the Manchester derby is Wayne Rooney, who scored 11 goals across the several derbies that he played in. And the player who played in more Manchester derbies than any other is Manchester United's Ryan Giggs, who played in a whopping great 36 derbies. The two teams have built an awesome rivalry. Although the two sides will want to beat other teams, they've created a mouth-watering fixture which has hearts pumping and fans on the edge of their seats. The next Manchester derby is the FA Cup final on the 3rd of June, and I cannot wait. I hope that you've enjoyed listening and learning about the Manchester derby in all of its glory. If you're listening on Spotify, you can take part in a poll and let me know who you think will win the FA Cup final. So remember, if you know someone who loves football just as much as you do, then please tell them about Football for Kids. And whether you're playing football soon, watching it on the telly or pitch side, I hope that you enjoy the game. See you next time.